I'm in Manhattan's Tony Greenwich Village, steeped in history and home to the rich and famous. In November 1987, attorney Joel Steinberg came home under the influence of crack cocaine and beat the 6-year-old girl that he called his daughter. He then went out to go have dinner with a friend and came home and freebased some more, ignoring the condition of the injured girl. The next day, she was dead. The case shocked New York City and the country. For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Sal Bono. This is New York Gritty.
It was 87, was Mayor Koch's third term. The city was seen as pretty much out of control, perhaps too big to be governed. This was a big break with what people considered a norm. There have been troubled children and troubled homes since New York has existed, but it wasn't much on anybody's radar because it mostly concerned people who were poor, desperate, alone.
A lot of buildings were being burned down. There was a lot of crime, especially when crack cocaine came out. It's like the city just went crazy. People were doing robberies, a lot of homicides, and it's like just like the city just went nuts.
Among those using crack cocaine was attorney Joel Steinberg. Steinberg, along with his partner, Hedda Nussbaum, lived in a brownstone on West 10th Street with who they claimed were their 2 children. Hedda had a promising career in publishing as both a writer and editor of children's books. In the mid-1980s, she met Joel, and colleagues reportedly said she stopped showing up for work and was let go from her company. She wasn't seen much after, but then she became a household name after her entire life unraveled on November 1st, 1987.
He went home to his 10th Street apartment in Greenwich Village under the influence of crack cocaine, and he beat Lisa Steinburg, a child he had illegally adopted. He had illegally adopted 2 kids. Basically, these struggling single mothers found this lawyer and paid him to find adoptive parents for their kids. Instead, he took the kids home, one being Lisa Steinberg, to his Greenwich Village apartment, that he shared with his live-in significant other, Hedda Nussbaum. They had a violent domestic relationship. He basically beat everybody. He had evidently a charming crack cocaine habit. So he beats this child, a regular occurrence, blow to the head, leaves her on the bathroom floor, goes out to dinner with a friend, comes back hours later, continues binging, freebasing cocaine, and he leaves the kid on the floor for about 8-10 hours.
The next morning, Hedda called 911 after baby Lisa stopped breathing. The 6-year-old was taken to a nearby hospital.
We got a job of a little girl in a hospital that had some type of head injury, and her parents were not in the hospital. We responded to the hospital. We were told about this story that there was a little girl that had subdural hematoma. She had some brain injuries, and her parents were not in the hospital. So at that point, me and my partner, Bobby Columbia, we went to West 10th Street, a very affluent neighborhood, and we knocked on the door, and Joe Steinberg opened the door. And I later on, I found out that he was an attorney. Back then, there was something called a joint response. Whenever there was any child that was hurt, I was on the child abuse team in my office, we would respond. The hospital would call us for any case involving a child. So they called us that there was a child in the hospital with a serious injury, and the child's parents had left the hospital. When we get to his apartment, the first thing we do is we knock on the door, and Joe Steinberg opens the door. What was very unusual about him is most parents whose kids are with that type of injury at a hospital will either be at the hospital, or be worried. When we got there, we knocked on the door. The first thing I said to Joe Steinberg is, we need you to come to the hospital. Your daughter is in very serious condition. She has a real serious injury. And the first thing he told me is he needs to take a shower, he needs to eat. He just made a lot of excuses, and I found that very, very suspicious of him. And when we came in, the first thing that I noticed was the house was in complete disarray. I mean, it looked like almost like a homeless person's house. It was really dirty. And the fact that we were on West 10th Street in a very affluent neighborhood, he was an attorney. I didn't expect to see the apartment in the condition that it was in. There was like food in the sink, like old, like vegetables. The apartment was really dirty. The windows were filthy. And the next thing I noticed was there was like a makeshift playpen, and there was a little baby inside, a little blonde-headed, really cute little boy inside within the playpen. So, we called for backup. We requested a sergeant respond after we saw the condition of the apartment and after I saw the baby. The little boy, when I approached him, I remember, one thing I remember about him was that he smiled at me, and I picked him up, and he was tied up like to the playpen. He had like a rope tied around his waist, and he was kind of like tied up to this makeshift playpen, and he smelled a little bit dirty, but he was really, really adorable, so we pick him up, and we're all, now at some point the sergeant responds. Now we're all standing there, and all of a sudden a woman comes out of the back room. And when I saw her, I just could not hide the look in my face, because when I saw her, I was like, oh my God, like she looked like she had been beaten like her whole life. Her nose looked like it was broken. Her ears had cauliflower ears. Her face was all bruised up, and she looked like such a wreck. And I remember staring at her and going like, God. And I remember him looking at me, and he hated me from the minute he met me. I mean, he just didn't like me at all, because I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe what she looked like. So at that point we knew that there was like something going on in this house, so we needed to get them all out of there.
The other child, a boy named Mitchell, was taken away by police and put in care of what would eventually be known as Child Protective Services. Joel Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum, however, were taken away in a squad car to a local precinct, but before they left the Greenwich Village apartment, the detective noticed something.
And we're walking out the door, and Hedda is locking the door, and Joel Steinberg is standing behind her. And I see him look at the back of her head, and she had all these cuts and bruises on her head, like she's been like almost like they needed to be stitched, but they weren't stitched. And he tells her, go put a handkerchief on your head. So she walks back into the apartment, and she wears, I believe it was blue, she puts on a blue handkerchief over her head. And then she goes in and she puts the kerchief on, and we leave. And I'm really upset because I know that he's beating her. I already knew he didn't like me from the minute that I saw her and my expression, and just everything that was going on. And I kind of like took control of the situation when I was inside the apartment. We had them both in the same car. Okay. And he's being really nice to her in the car. So we have them in the same car. We didn't separate them, and he's being really nice to her in the car, like acting really loving. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, he's doing this because he doesn't want her to tell us what's going on.
What was going on was something that would shock the entire city and eventually the nation.
We've always looked the other way when it comes to poor people. It takes something this big, something so different, to capture the city's imagination. So he lived on West 10th Street in Greenwich Village. He was a lawyer, not an ex-con just out of the joint, not an unemployed nobody who beat his wife. This story had everything: race, class, sex, and vulnerable children.
The case became a media circus, with many clamoring for details, but Detective Rivera says some of the injuries that she saw on Nussbaum's body shocked her to her core.
It turns into this huge case we weren't expecting that day. And now we start doing a video of her face, of her head. Oh my God, when she lifted up her pant leg, her leg was all ulcerated. It was oozing like with pus. It was all bruised up. I mean, it was like so many, it looked like she was about to lose her leg. That's how bad it looked. I mean, if you ever heard the video or saw the video, if you listen to it, the guy that's filming is going, oh my God.
He got violent with me, and he threw me to the floor.
She was the victim. And no matter what, she had the kindest eyes. You can tell that she was a good person, that she just was a victim of this animal, Joel Steinberg.
Like many New Yorkers and those around the country who paid attention to the case of baby Lisa, it left an emotional scar on Detective Rivera.
The first time I saw her, she was laying on a stretcher. And one thing I recall I've said this many times, any interview I've ever done, is the dirt on the bottom of her feet. She was a little girl, her feet were black from the dirt, and I'm thinking she comes from West 10th Street, why are her feet so dirty? That's the first thing that I noticed about her at the hospital. that her feet were really dirty and that she looked like she was dirty and had a couple of bruises around her face and stuff. The photo that I recall the most, saw this photo in the newspaper later on, depicted Lisa sitting at school. It was Halloween, and she's sitting at her desk. And it makes me so sad thinking about it. And she had two little candy corns on her desk, and she had no costume on. But one thing that you notice is that she had a big chunk of hair missing on the back of her head, And I don't know if somebody pulled it off. It just broke my heart to see her like that. It's such an old case, and to this day still upsets me. You know what it is? That was the first case where I saw a little kid die, and it really bothered me for years. And to this day, when I talk about this case, for some reason, it still upsets me so much. At the grand jury, I testified and I cried in front of the whole grand jury. Even at Lisa's funeral, I cried so much during her funeral that the chief of detectives back then, Rosenthal, said to me, "I don't think you belong in special victim in sex crimes." It's called sex crimes then. Rosenthal said to me, "I don't think you belong in sex crimes. I don't think you can handle this." I go, "No, I can." But it was just so hard for me. Watch, the funeral was so big, like the whole city was there, turned into a huge funeral for her. And it was just really sad for me, to watch her little coffin being taken up the steps and stuff, so it was hard. And it was the first time I actually seen a child die. I mean, I had kids die on patrol, but it was different. It was newborns or something, but this was different. This was the first time I had a kid die that was actually from violence,
Steinberg was charged with little Lisa's death. His trial would be one of the first to allow cameras in the courtroom in New York City, giving the public a look at the monstrous abuse Steinberg had perpetrated.
Television cameras, that's a big deal. They didn't really allow that for the longest time. There were court cases over it, in and out.
During the trial, Hedda Nussbaum testified against her partner, enough to secure him a guilty verdict. In exchange for her testimony, prosecutors dismissed charges against Nussbaum, saying she was, quote, not legally responsible for Lisa's death, end quote. A decision that some in the public felt let a woman who had been aware that Lisa had been abused off the hook. But Liz Roberts from Safe Horizon views it differently.
I think in some cases, and reading Hedda Nussbaum's account of what she went through, listening to her testimony in the trial, in some cases it can come to the extreme of really having distorted thinking, because this person has exerted so much control over you, has placed you in such profound terror and pain over and over again that you actually don't know what's true anymore. And I think for survivors of domestic violence, that's there's a continuum from you start to really believe their insults, that you're stupid or that you're ugly, to the kind of extreme experience that Hedda Nussbaum had of her whole understanding of reality being distorted.
She was lying in his arms limp. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "What's the difference what happened? This is your child. Hasn't this gone far enough?"
In 1989, Steinberg spoke to Inside Edition and denied killing Lisa.
I have no idea what transpired that night. The scenario that the investigators created is she climbed up on the sink to get to the medicine cabinet, to get to Hedda's makeup. And she probably fell, scraped her back against the wall, and hit the wicker basket in the bathroom. Hedda said to the police at the time she was arrested, to Detective Rivera, that everything that transpired in the house was her fault or her responsibility.
You find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty. They exaggerate, they distort, and they don't give fair understanding and fair representation to people. And it's hard.
How do you feel about Lisa?
Well, that's too complicated a question. Both children were my life. I can't tolerate the losses. I mean, you see, these things don't happen. There's no reason for it. I miss her. I miss the whole family. I miss the life that we had.
So you think you were the best father that Lisa could have?
Oh yes, I enjoyed this. I miss her a great deal. I had it testified. She said I was a superb parent, an excellent parent. Every time that I played with the children, which was all the time, it was joyous. They were my life.
Nussbaum's testimony described a different picture.
My nose was broken, obviously broken, and my ear became a cauliflower ear.
The case changed the way the city and the media handled domestic violence and child abuse cases. Liz Roberts, the CEO of Safe Horizon, a victim advocacy organization, spoke to Inside Edition Digital, and she says this case brought attention to something that wasn't openly talked about. Back then, in '87, seeing and hearing something like this, how unusual was it for the public to try and say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean he's locking you up at home? Or you're not going out? Or if you do go out, it's in the middle of the night to go grocery shopping? Or that's what neighbors had said. Neighbors had also noticed that she had bruises on her face. What is it about then that leads us to now?
The way we think about domestic violence or intimate partner violence is that it's a situation where in an intimate relationship, one person is using power and control or exerting power and control over the other person, typically through a range of tactics. So there can be physical abuse, there can be sexual abuse, there can be economic abuse, psychological and emotional abuse. And often children are part of that as well. Children can be, put in the middle or used as a tool of control.
In 2004, Steinburg was released from prison.
When you heard that Joel got out in 2004, what was your reaction?
Couldn't believe it. I was so mad. I can't believe that he's out.
When Steinberg got out, Burke tracked him down to a building in Harlem to question him about his past.
And I asked him about the case, and he was unrepentant. He was still saying, it was manslaughter by omission. Basically my fault was not calling the police when she needed aid. He still said, look at the death certificate. He unrepentant and full-blown denial.
The Daily News published Burke's story about his encounter with Steinberg.
That blew up the spot. He wasn't talking to any press. Part of the things I remember him saying to me, like, you can't publish. He is a sociopath, and frankly, there are sociopaths all around us. He just happened to kill a child.
Steinberg is living in Harlem. Calls and emails left by Inside Edition Digital to him have gone unanswered.
I think that he deserves much more time for the crime that he committed. I think that he got off a little bit easy. I think if that happened now, he probably would get much more time. It's horrible. I hope he's suffering a little bit.
If someone is watching this episode right now and seeing what's going on and saying, hey, I know someone that's going through this, or maybe they're going through it themselves, or maybe a young teenager is saying, hey, this is my mom, or this is my dad, or this was me a few years ago, what can they do, and who can they reach out to, and how can your organization help?
Absolutely. So what's wonderful is today we have so many resources, and we have a much better understanding of abuse that happens in families and of trauma and its impact. So if you're experiencing it, if somebody you love is experiencing it and you're not sure what to do, perhaps a friend, a colleague, you can call a hotline, a local hotline in New York City. That's 1-800-621-HOPE, which will get you through to Safe Horizon, where I work, or a national domestic violence hotline, and say, this is the situation. How can I help? You don't have to figure out what to do on your own, and you don't have to reveal who you are, where you live, any of your identifying information. You can call a hotline and speak to them completely confidentially.
Hedda Nussbaum changed her identity and moved out of New York City. Her whereabouts are unknown. The youngest child, a boy named Mitchell, was returned to his birth mother. Messages left by Inside Edition Digital to both of them also went unanswered.